certain kinds of films work really well having that look of a film that had a crew of 6 people. I mean, you might be able to fake it and have production values that look like you had a crew of 30 when it was really only a crew of 6, but some films really need that kind of a feel to them. So I do think it depends on the film and what the creative team's vision for that story is. So we got lucky on this project where our vision for how to tell the story the best way we could really kind of lined up to the budget. But in the end, if we'd only been able to spend $100,000, then we would have figured out how to make a film for that. And I don't know if it would have, I don't know what it would have been a different film.
Welcome to the Filmmaker Mixer podcast, the podcast by filmmakers for filmmakers. Filmmaker Mixer is a creative hub where aspiring and established filmmakers come together to share experiences, insights, strategies, and inspiration.
Hello, everybody. This is the Filmmaker Mixer podcast, and today we are chatting with Jacob Smith. He's got a new film out called Dancing on the Elephant. His co-director, Julia Neal, may jump in later, so hopefully she'll be able to join us. But for now, it's just Jacob and I. So, Jacob, welcome.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate having the chance to chat.
No, happy to do it. Happy to do it. Well, give us the pitch. What's your film all about?
You bet. Dancing on the Elephant is about 2 women that forge a relationship while they're living in and trying to escape a nursing home. That's the short version. Long version. You put the long version?
Give us any version you want. Yeah, what's the longer version?
Well, it's a story about family and aging and loneliness and friendship and dementia and a bunch of characters in the story. The 2 women are the main characters, but there are other characters whose lives are all intersecting and also are grappling with the same kinds of challenges in their own ways. So it's about a bunch of people who are trying to navigate a really challenging time in their lives, and their loved ones and their caretakers are all trying to navigate what is also really complicated for them in the same circumstance. So it's a really lovely story about all of these people trying to work through an experience that so many of us have already experienced ourselves or will experience or have watched our close friends experience. This is like it may not be universally shared, but it sure is shared widely.
Yeah, that's for sure. That's for sure. And was this a play originally? Is that what I read in the notes? Okay.
Exactly. It was a play. Lisa Hagen, a playwright from a Canadian playwright near Toronto, wrote the stage play, and the script itself won some awards, and she got it produced a few times, and that won some awards. And then she wrote a film adaptation, and that's what Julia and I came across and acquired the rights to. We read it. We read a lot of scripts. We were script hunting and read that and just fell in love with the characters and the story right away. And Lisa, we started working with her, and she was great. And so we ended up acquiring the rights to make the film and did a bunch of continued work with Lisa until we got to where it was time to go to camera. And here we are.
And so you didn't discover it as the play. She did the play, then she wrote the screenplay. And then how did the screenplay end up on your desk?
Well, really, Julie and I decided we wanted to make our first narrative feature. She and I have been doing film stuff together for a long time, but neither of us had ever made a feature narrative before, and thought it'd be really fun to do it together. So we set out and there are like these sort of like dating sites for producers and writers, and asked everybody we knew for scripts and ideas of writers, and just read a ton of scripts, and eventually found this one, which really it resonated really deeply for us, and we decided to grab it and figure out how to make it.
And once you acquired the script, were there any changes? Did you take it in any slightly different directions at all? Based on cast or based on locations or things like that?
Sure. I'd say the soul of the script is the same. There were plays that become films. One of the challenges is, how do you allow it to feel more cinematic so it doesn't
Right.
just feel like you filmed a play? And Lisa, when she did the screen adaptation, had done a lot of that work already, and we just kind of built on where she had taken it and just found ways to help give it a little more sense of a film kind of energy. So we'd done some of that, and then lots of little tweaks, like when you actually have the actors or the locations and things, some things don't work the way you imagine, so you play around with them. And and then in the edit, I mean, also in the edit, ultimately you're just trying to figure out, you shot all the stuff you shot, and then what's the best way to get it all cut together so that it lands in the way that you want to land. So I'd say soul of the script is the same, and then lots of smaller changes, but nothing really major. It was really just getting it to flow as best as possible for our sensibilities and for the actors.
And what's your background? How did you get involved in film?
Oh, my background has nothing to do with film, weirdly, just non-linear. I do politics. I worked on the Hill in DC in the Senate for a while. I served in elected office in my own community in Colorado for some years. And so basically I've done politics and environmental advocacy work, climate advocacy work for a long time. And maybe 15 years ago, I've been a film lover my whole life, I guess. And maybe 15 years ago decided I wanted to see what the making side of it was and started taking classes and meeting filmmakers. I was living in DC at the time, which is where I met Julia, and lots of like the meetups and just the community of filmmakers who are all figuring out how to make the things they want to make and tell the stories they want to make. So I plugged in there and slowly started making films.
So how did you get this first feature off the ground? Did you I mean, a lot of independent filmmakers self-finance, they, go to small studios. What was your process?
A few things. The equity part was a bunch of people we just pitched lots of people that we knew on becoming investors in the film. And I think for a lot of it was wanting to support us.
Right.
Specifically, for a lot of them, they're cinephiles, or they're just supporters of film in a broader sense and love the idea of being part of a project and helping get a project off the ground. And I think all or almost all of our investors also really love the story. Like, this is a story about two women, which is in and of itself a lot rarer than it should be, and two older women, which is even rarer, told from their perspective and about this experience that so many people are having or touching. So I think that was a big motivation. So we raised some money, and originally this was a US production. We were going to film it in New York, actually, originally, and COVID shot that down. We rebooted a few times, which twice didn't work. But then the third time we rebooted, we found new producers. We just really did a reboot on the project and made it a Canadian production. So our producers, Canadian-based producers, took over the producing. It became their project as producers. And Julia and I stayed on as directors, but then everybody else was Canadian. We filmed in Nova Scotia, which is where the story is actually set. And by being a Canadian production and employing all Canadian cast and crew, except for Julia and I, that allowed the project to tap into a bunch of incentives that are pretty generous. I think this is maybe true in a lot of places that are not the US, where there's a lot of support for the arts, and that's certainly true in Canada for film. And so that just enabled a bunch of resources to be part of the film financing package. And on top of all that, the exchange rate was great, was really helpful. US dollar was really strong to the Canadian dollar. So it just meant all that money we raised in the US became worth a lot more in Canada. So all that added up to a decent budget, certainly larger by an order of magnitude than anything I'd ever touched before. So that was, it's still small, it was under $1 million, but it was a much larger budget than Julie and I had ever worked with. So it was awesome to be able to have some resources to put into how do we tell the story in the best possible way.
And I know, I think I'm correct about this, but I may be wrong. I've dealt with some Canadian producers before, and I think obviously the more crew members and so forth, writers and so forth you have that are Canadian, the more um, um, uh, co-financing you get, I guess is the way to put it. Was there pushback on you guys directing at all because you're not Canadian, or did that ever get into the mix?
No, not as such. It's all formula driven. There's certain requirements, and it's formula driven. So we made sure we met all of the requirements. So our
Gotcha.
producers took on the project. We couldn't have shared the project with them in the same way. That would not have been a Canadian production then. So our Canadian producer colleagues took on the project. It became their project with Julie and I as directors, and then followed all those rules. And then they assess points basically based on, are the people that you cast or hire Canadian? And a lot of the support we got was provincial in Nova Scotia. So that's not just, are they Canadian, but are they Nova Scotia folks? And
Oh,
almost everybody
interesting.
on the casting crew is Nova Scotia. The only exceptions were three of the actors. Three of the actors were from other parts of Canada, Ontario, and another one of the maritime provinces. So basically everybody in that project is Nova Scotian except for three of the actors who are Canadian but not Nova Scotian, and then the two of us directors. And that just feeds into the formula, and they figure out what that means from an incentive standpoint, which I think
Right.
is like that's how the state incentives work in the US in my experience as well. You're just doing these points based on how much you spend in the state and how many people local you employ and all that stuff. That worked really similarly. It added up to a lot of support that was more than we could have gotten in the US.
And how'd you find your cast?
And I'll just add that
Oh,
the
sure.
script really was it's written by a Canadian playwright. It's set on Cape Breton Island. Like it's a story that really deserves to be told and filmed in Nova Scotia if you can afford to do it. And it turned out it was actually better for us to do it there. So all of those things added together, I think, to work out really well. The cast was a mix of a casting agent, so just lots of tapes and auditions and conversations with actors, as well as for some of the bigger actors that we weren't auditioning them. It was really an offer only kind of thing. So we were just poking around to figure out who do we think the best people are for the roles, and figuring out how it's the best way to reach out to them. And then you're just doing the thing that I imagine everybody's doing this, but certainly indie filmmakers are just, who do I know that knows somebody, and how can I get the script or at least the idea of this project in front of that actor, and hope that when it crosses their desk, they look at it and they like it. Because if they do, then you can at least start the conversation. And that's what ended up happening with most of the larger actors.
And I know you said it's an indie film. How big was your footprint? How big was your crew? Were you and how many days did you shoot?
Yeah, the shooting was, I think we shot 18 days total. I think it was 17 kind of full crew days, and then one other day that was uh, more like pickups and just smaller stuff. So call it 18. And then the crew, probably a typical day on set, we had a crew maybe of 20-ish or a little bit more than that. So really small compared to a traditional studio film, but good size. Certainly, like again, way larger than anything I've ever worked on, and it meant that we had grips and gaffers, and it'd be like, okay, here's the vision for the scene, and the camera department would go off, and they were really competent, skilled. They knew what they were doing, and they were efficient, and they went off and did it. Same thing with costume and wardrobe and hair and all of that stuff. It was just it was really helpful. It has some downsides, like it's not as agile as when your whole crew is 12 people, uh, but it has some upsides too. Just a bunch of people that really know their craft that are able to elevate the production value.
Yeah, on indie films, there's that sweet spot of keeping the crew size lean enough that you can move efficiently, but also having it big enough that you can move efficiently, if you know what I mean. In other words, you need a certain number of bodies to get stuff done, and so if you go too lean, it slows you down. But there's always that sweet spot of having the right, the right level of crew on an indie film that can help you get what you need and do it quickly. Um, so I,
I think it's project dependent as well. Like
true.
certain kinds of films work really well having that look of a film that had a crew of six people, and some films really, I mean, you might be able to fake it and have production values that look like you had a crew of 30 when it was really only a crew of six. But some films really need that kind of a feel to them. So I do think it depends on the film and what the creative team's vision for that story is. So we got lucky on this project where our vision for how to tell the story the best way we could really kind of lined up to the budget. But in the end, if we'd only been able to spend $100,000, then we would have figured out how to make a film for that. And I don't know if it would have, I don't know what it would have been a different film. So I'm really grateful it all worked out the way.
I'm curious about something else. Once you get into a shoot on an indie film or any film really, as you're working the scene with your cast, a lot of times stuff that's on the page starts to fall away. Did that happen? Did you find moments where once the actors were in that moment in the scene that you thought, you know what, they can do more with the emotion and the body language and a look between two actors versus the dialogue? Did some of that dialogue fall away?
Yeah, that's such an interesting question, a really good question. Thank you for that. And yeah, for sure. I think the script it's really well written. So we're at least starting from a script that really works as is. So that's really helpful. And I think that also helps the actors just get to a place where then they can kind of run off of intuition more. And for sure, our actors, Julia and I are not the kinds of directors that are super disciplined about the script, like the getting exactly what's in the script out of the mouths of the actors. Some directors are, every director has their style and approach, and that's like whatever works is great.
Well,
For us,
it's the spirit of the scene that you're trying to achieve.
definitely for us, the spirit of the scene. There's some places where there's certain words or phrasing that are important because they set up certain plot points or they have some connection to some kind of a payoff later. So there's some stuff that really does need to happen for us on this project. But in general, we were pretty flexible, and some actors were super fidelity to the script. Others took more liberty, and where as long as it worked, we were very open to the improvisation. And there's a bunch of lines in the film that are like, we didn't write that. That's just Mary Walsh coming up with a really funny line that she tucked in that we hadn't ever thought of before, and it just kind of worked. So there was definitely a mix of all that stuff. We did care a lot about, ironically, given how much I'm talking now in this conversation with you, but we did care a lot about leaving silence, leaving lots of space. And so in some cases, I think words fell away were just we let the camera hang for a while.
Right.
Not super aggressive. We don't have any like 2-minute takes, oneers with no movement, or just like a Kelly Riker train slowly coming across, which I love that. I love that stuff, but we didn't have anything of that in this film. But we do have some silences where things just kind of hang, and it's the actors who are good. The script is good enough to get them there, and the actors deliver these performances to me at least, that really work, even with, or especially when they have this chance to find some silence. So really long-winded way of saying yes to your question. Definitely some things fell away.
Well, on indie films, oftentimes we talk about the happy accidents that happen. You know, something happens, you lose a location, or an actor gets sick, and you have to think on the fly and come up with a solution that sometimes ends up being better. Anything like that happen on your film?
Oh, we had so many random things. Yeah, I mean, I imagine this is true at every budget level, but probably like the scale and flavor of the things that happen are just different. But any independent filmmaker, I don't think you could make a film that doesn't have tons of those happy accidents, or they're just accidents and you have to live with them, but they may not be happy, but they work well enough. Like you
Right.
make them all. So there was, yeah, tons of that kind of stuff. Some of it was just like some of it was actually flood lines that ended up working better.
Oh,
Other
interesting.
times, just like random things where we were shooting some of those interstitial shots of like that get us from scene to scene of the winter in what is actually Nova Scotia, near Halifax, but is set in Cape Breton, and snow and trees and all of those sorts of things. And there happened to be some people on a hill off in the distance sledding. And we thought, wouldn't that be a nice shot? And they wrapped up just as we finished the other shot, our shot list. So, oh man, that's a bummer. So we went over and talked to them, and they said, "Oh yeah, sure, we'll go back and sled some more for you." And they did, and we got this. It's a really nice little
How
shot.
cool.
Yeah. So like some of it's just that kind of random stuff that uh, I don't. Yeah, I don't know. Like it happens on. I think every film has some of that stuff because that's just the nature of low budget
Of
filmmaking.
course. Of course. Well, Jacob, before we wrap up, tell the folks how they can learn more about your film, find out where it's going to be screening next. I know you're doing some festivals. So, how can they learn more about your project?
Yeah, you can find out about the film and where we're screening, what's coming up, how to watch it, all on our website for sure, dancingontheelephant.com. And we're also on Instagram at Dancing on the Elephant.
Jacob, it's been a pleasure chatting with you. Don't hang up yet. I want to chat with you just a little bit more once we stop the recording, but best of luck and keep us posted on the project.
I really appreciate that, Jeff. It's fun to chat with you, and really appreciate your inviting us to have a conversation.
Absolutely. Well, you take care.
thank you for listening to the Filmmaker Mixer podcast, a podcast created and hosted by filmmakers Jeff Stolen and Andrew Lamping, and produced by Melody Lopez.
Our theme song was composed by Stephen D. Bennett.
Make sure to follow or subscribe on whatever platform you're listening to us on, and stay tuned for future episodes.